Hi, everybody, and welcome to our session today. We are joined by our special guest, Daniel Faber. He is in Silicon Valley, based over there, but we'll forgive him for that he's not at home. And he's got a really incredible history and resume with what he's done. He is a researcher turned into a serial space entrepreneur. So not just an entrepreneur, but a space entrepreneur, and a serial one at that, which is kind of unheard of a little bit in Australia. So it's a pretty, we might just call him our own little unicorn space entrepreneur at the moment. He's currently the CEO of Orbit Fab, and he's building a thriving space marketplace, including supplying water to the ISS and putting petrol stations in space, which is just kind of a bonkers idea if you don't understand the why of it. And we're certainly going to get into that in a moment. He was previously CEO of Deep Space Industries, pursuing space mining, where he grew sales from $0 to $10 million in 5 years. And he has a really bold and interesting vision about how we can build a thriving space economy. Plus just a fascinating history, like a really, really nice guy, genuinely good guy, and thinking about things in an unusual way, which I think will really, help us and inspire all of us. So welcome, Daniel. It's fantastic to have you join us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kellyanne. It's great to be here.
So I want to dig in before we get into what you're doing now, which we'll get to very, very quickly. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and your background? I know you're from New South Wales. I know you went through engineering programs, but what is it that sort of, inspires you to space? And what is it that maybe, is there anything in your childhood, or has there been a couple of defining moments that kind of pushed you into this journey that you're on, which is not sort of something that most kids wake up and go, this is what I'm going to do in the future, as a young lad in Australia?
Well, first I have to burst the bubble there. I'm actually from Tasmania.
Oh.
Yeah, I have the scar to prove it. No, I grew up on a farm. My grandfather was a dairy farmer, but my dad's an engineer. My mum's a scientist. We had a wall of science fiction in the house growing up. So I guess I read through that and got a lot of ideas. But I tell people in America when they try and figure out where Tasmania is, that its biggest export is young people. There are a lot more opportunities elsewhere, and so I went to UNSW. That's where I got my New South Wales connection, and would have stayed in Australia, but at the time there wasn't anyone building spacecraft in Australia. I think FedSat was being built, and the project manager got my CV from 6 different people, and still didn't have a job opening, so that wasn't going anywhere. So yeah, I had to really make something myself, and that was always in my mind. But a sort of critical moment on this path that sort of sent me in this direction. I remember in 1997, first year of university, and my good friend Jeffrey Candeloro brought to class one of those, where you wear the red and the blue glasses and get the 3D thing. He had the Mars Sojourner rover on the surface of Mars in this red and blue stereoscopic image, and he passed that around the class and said, "I'm starting the Space Frontier Society at the university. Do you want to join?" And so, of course, I signed up instantly and showed up at the first meeting and said, "I think we should do a project, like build a satellite or something." And next thing I knew, we were trying to build a satellite in undergrad at university. I haven't stopped trying to build spacecraft and do those kind of things. That's kind of what sent me down that path.
So let me unpack that for a moment, because I think that's a really fascinating thing, right? Yep. So somebody goes, let's form a club, basically form a society. This thing's really cool. Let's build a satellite. That is not generally people's response for doing something that's really, quite frankly, hard. We're talking back in 1997, so we're not talking about today, but something that's hard, expensive, and really challenging to do. There seems like there's either a certain level of optimism or naivety or something there. What is it what is it that you think made you kind of just jump in with boots and all without even any hesitation? Because a lot of people would be like, we should do something, and then actually go, oh, but it's too hard. And it's clearly the too hard part hasn't registered for you or something there.
Well, come on, I was 20 years old. I thought I knew everything, and nothing was unachievable. And nobody had told me I couldn't. Though I have to say that the head of aerospace tried to tell us that it was a crazy idea, and we decided we'd do it anyway. And I had actually some of our advisors. I remember somebody once said, you should ask the people with experience. You should ask your elders. They will tell you what cannot be done and why, and then you should do it anyway. And so we took that and our own hubris and spent the next 4 years learning how not to build spacecraft. But we kicked off the BlueSat program at a university in New South Wales, which is still going on, and has sort of helped to train a whole bunch of undergraduate engineers on what are satellites. And I keep running into people in the international industry every so often who've come from UNSW and have been involved in that program. And so, it may not have achieved getting a satellite to orbit in the 1 or 2 years we initially thought, but we definitely learned a lot. And that was really, we're at university. What else can you ask for? And after that, I just managed to argue my way into pretty good jobs building real spacecraft.
Okay, there's just a lot of richness in that I think is actually really powerful, because that idea of just do it anyway, and being told you can't do it but you're going to give it a shot. I think there's something, and you're right, as a 20-something-year-old at university, you tend to feel a bit invincible and that you do know it all, but it's great that you did it. It's got to feel pretty good though when you do run into people have come after you and have actually come through those programs that are now in the space sector and contributing, knowing, that you've played a part in their destination and where they're heading as well, by giving it a shot back then. So thank you for contributing to the sector for so many years. And probably most people wouldn't actually know that to be able to thank you for that, and your colleagues back at the time as well.
Well, the one that I think is possibly more impressive, one of the things that we started in that club was the Australian Space Science Conference, because we decided there was no space science conference, and this was mostly Jeffrey, my friend, and so we set that up, and absolutely hilarious. We showed up on the first day of the conference, and all the students came in suits, thinking, "Oh, we're going to a conference. This is important." All the academics came dressed in casual. The second day, all the academics took a cue from us and came in suits, and we all took a cue from the academics and came in casual. It was absolutely hilarious. But that was like 10 or 15 people. That conference is still going. It is now the Australian Space Science Conference. So I think it's, 24 years, something like that. It's that one I think has been really great.
I think that's incredible. What a legacy to give to so many generations, and one that's still paying it forward, right? In years to come. I think that's fantastic. So that's incredible. So you got your way over to Silicon Valley. You started working over there. Tell us about, maybe tell us about, 2 or 3 sort of defining moments in the space sector that led you to Orbit Fab.
Yeah, so I guess going back to undergrad, I grew up on a farm, so always reasonably pragmatic, even though I thought I was invincible and had a lot of hubris. So important was to have that and to listen to reality. So always taking feedback. One of the things I did realize there was no space agency, there's no big aerospace companies, there's no path with which we could create a bustling space economy, create jobs in space, or anything like that. And yet I realized, we want to address some existential risks, that I want to do something good for humanity. It's hubris again, perhaps. And I want an exciting career. Let's get people off this rock. That will, increase our odds as a species of surviving the next 100,000 years and more. So it's something that might be achievable. I wrote down then a list of industries that might pay for the first permanent job in space. And that list was 2 things: asteroid mining and tourism. I've added a few things since then, but that was the list, and I couldn't see myself as a tour operator. So I started thinking about asteroid mining. And I'm like, oh, well, we'll build a satellite, and then we'll build one that goes to Mars, and then we'll land on Mars, and then we'll start mining. How hard can this be? We'll do this in 5 years. Complete hubris. But I just sort of kept chipping away. And the other thing I am is stubborn. And so I'm still chipping away at that 25 years later. The places that led me then, I traveled around the world at the end of third year university and stuck my head into every company and organization that would let me in, trying to get a job or get onto a PhD program or build an asteroid flyby mission. Why not? And so I had some crazy conversations, and no doubt embarrassed myself terribly because I knew nothing, but managed to talk to enough places. And through that and other things I was doing, I got recommended to a company in Toronto. And so I moved to Canada first. So the US is actually the 7th country that I've lived in. I've built spacecraft in Belgium, Netherlands, Canada, went back to Australia for a bit. During the last Australian Space Research Program, we were trying to do Antarctic broadband, high-speed internet for Antarctica, and then finally to Silicon Valley. So I've now been here for 8 years, and Most recently at Deep Space Industries, we actually had the big, hairy, audacious goal of asteroid mining. We put that out on the shingle. But I joined the company full-time after 18 months. And the two real co-founders of that company, they'd tried a financing model which can be described as bag a billionaire. And it didn't work, unfortunately. So when I joined, we had some small investment. We had about 3 or 4 months of cash in the bank. They did the paperwork to let me work in the US, which you don't need such onerous paperwork now, which is nice. But back then it was all under international trade in arms regulations, anything that said satellite. And so I finally got into the US and sort of took over running Deep Space Industries and brought in a technology strategy. So we built small thrusters, basically glorified steam kettles that could move small satellites around in orbit. You just take water and heat it up to 1,000 degrees Kelvin and push it out the back, and you'll move in the other direction. And it turns out there was no small thruster for satellites. That's why we did it. There was also no thruster that could run off asteroid-derived materials. And so water we know we can get from asteroids. We can turn that into a few different things. We can get hydrocarbons, but we decided the simplest thing we could start with, and the thing where there was a gap in the market, was these water thrusters. And so we built those. It saw some success and was eventually acquired by a European thruster manufacturer. But out of that, we had a small, not really fuel efficient thruster, but very cheap. And our customers are trading that off against buying lots of fuel to go with that thruster, or buying an expensive thruster that needed less fuel. And so we had that kernel of the idea, okay, there's got to be a better way to do it. And we also knew that one of the biggest risk items to asteroid mining was, where is the market? And we described the market as selling fuel in space, but nobody was buying or selling fuel in space. So we get to tick that box as well. So one day, 10 years, 15 years, I'd hope to place a purchase order with an asteroid mining company. But right now, we're trying to solve that problem of just getting a fuel supply in orbit.
Yeah. So that brings you kind of then to the journey of Orbit Fab, and I want to dig into this and get you to describe in your own words what you do in a second. But I think I want to pull something out for everybody watching today and listening to this, because I think it's really important, because a lot of what you've just said there is a very different way of thinking to how most people approach a problem. They really do go in a linear path and sort of look at, well, what's been done before and how might we build upon that, which is what you're describing, something completely different, of actually going, what is possible. Let's not worry about whether we know that we've got the science and engineering to do it. What are the things that we need to do? You're thinking really upstream, not just putting things up in space, but an upstream thinking process of going, what are the problems we're going to encounter and we're going to need solutions for? And let me build those now and work backwards to where the industry is today. So, that view of, putting in a purchase order for fuel in space before there's, a market need, saying, hi, I need that in space is super interesting and different way of thinking. But Orbit Fab, in your own words, catch us all up to speed about, why Orbit Fab, what are you doing there, and what's the sort of vision and mission? Because I think there's nothing better than hearing it from the founder. So
yeah, on your point of sort of thinking at higher levels and things, I think it's you might have heard of the 5 whys. It's just made famous by Toyota. When they're trying to understand a problem, they'll ask why 5 times, and why this, or why that, or why that, and they'll get down to solve problems on the nitty gritty. You can also ask the same going up, right? Well, what do I want to do? This. Well, why do I want to do that? What am I trying to achieve? What's the level above that matters? And that's how I ended up at, we should just be addressing existential risks. If you want to work on something important for humanity, let's work on making sure humanity keeps surviving. That sounds like the most important thing we can work with. And then, all right, well, how do we solve that? And work back down the chain. So I've always thought like that. And so I've always been looking out for these opportunities. So when I'm also not necessarily the fastest learner. It's taken me 25 years to get to here, right? And we're not asteroid mining yet. It took, I don't know, a dozen years to figure out the technology and get that straight, and realize that the most important thing wasn't the technology, it was the business and being able to make money off it, so that then you could afford great engineers to build the tech. And so this is my 4th startup, the first one that's really VC funded. Again, perhaps a slow learner, but I had to go from engineering to business, which is a very different field. Yeah. And so lots of lessons on the way. And one of the reasons that I came to Silicon Valley, the first time I was here was just for a few months working with a company that had been a supplier on my first startup. And I realized everyone here spoke entrepreneur, And there's basically a company factory, right? There's thousands of people that know how to take a company from the size of 20 to the size of 200. And then a completely different set of people know how to take a company from 200 to 2,000 across all the aspects of a business. So there's really an incredible depth and sort of critical mass of company building skills in Silicon Valley. That's now diffusing around the world, right? It's not completely unique here, but the critical mass is still important. So that sort of way of thinking and looking at it sort of is now sort of part of how I see the world and how I try to organize the company and everything like that. So we get to, well, what is Orbit Fab and what are we doing? We're trying to build a bustling space economy that can support permanent jobs in space, right? And I mentioned tourism, mining, might be entertainment content. Tom Cruise wants to shoot a movie. There's a Russian director and actress on the International Space Station right now shooting a movie. I'd love for them to like hire a permanent camera guy or something and just don't bring him back, right? First permanent job in space. None of these 6-month government holidays, just hire somebody that you want to be in space permanently. That doesn't exist right now. Maybe it's in-space manufacturing. There's a few different things that could be. So, but what it needs is a bustling space economy. So you're generating the revenues that you can start to then afford that cost, which is massive. In the 90s, I estimated it was about $250 million a year. And now that number still seems to be about right. So what's generating sufficient revenue that you can handle that expense? And then you look at those industries and where it's going to go. So we need that infrastructure, right? Our vision at Orbit Fab, my co-founder Jeremy and I, we sort of agreed on this. We need a bustling space economy. How do you do that? Well, we need to bustle. You can't bustle unless you've got fuel, unless you can dock things together, cooperate, do assembly, do maintenance and repairs, start to build up bigger structures from smaller parts. All those things need to happen. And you absolutely positively need a fuel supply. Yeah. At the moment, we throw satellites away after one tank of fuel, like single use. Look at an aircraft. It's similar kind of cost, a couple of $100 million. Flies once across the Pacific. Say it's carrying cargo or whatever. You might make a few $100,000 off that one trip. But if you throw it away, you're out $200 million or $199 million, right? But if you can fly a couple of times a day over 15, 20 years, you're making billions of dollars out of that asset. Now it makes sense. You can't imagine throwing that away after one trip. Or a car, right? You fill it up every week, and that's like over 15 years, about 750 times you fill your gas tank. You can't imagine towing that much fuel. I mean, all the extra fuel you'd have to carry just to tow the fuel is unthinkable. Yeah. And now that reusability, it's an asset. You don't throw away assets, you reuse them. That's coming to rockets. And rockets are similarly expensive, right? 20, 50, $100 million for a rocket. We use them once and we throw them away. And yet we think that that's just normal. This is insane. The amazing thing is it's so valuable to be in space, to have that position where you can see and communicate with the whole world, that we do it anyway, despite how ridiculously inefficient it is. But now SpaceX have broken the back on that, and Blue Origin have their suborbital vehicle, and Richard Branson's vehicle are reusable. And SpaceX is up to 10 times they've refueled their orbital boosters and launch them. And that's just a start, right? We're going to get to hundreds and we're going to get to thousands of reuses out of these types of assets. Spacecraft, we don't refuel them. We use them once and we throw them away and we're done. It's incredible. And these are even more expensive. Some of them are worth billions of dollars. And if you don't have fuel, you can't keep them on location. They just slowly drift away. The moon pulls on them, the sun pulls on them, the Earth has a lumpy gravity field. They never stay put. Very annoying. So when you run out of fuel, you're drifting. And you're risking having a collision. You're not where you need to be. So there are now requirements that you have to get them out of orbit. Either you put them in the atmosphere to burn up, or you put them into a graveyard orbit. You use a fair bit of fuel to get rid of them, and that's it. They're gone. They're done. Yeah. We have to refuel that. That's the genesis for Orbit Fab. So we are petrol stations in space.
I love this, right? Okay, I've got about half a dozen things I need to unpack from all of that because So first I'm going to start with, I'm going to go back to the Silicon Valley mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset, because I think you said something really important there that I think we need to talk about in Australia, and we need to talk about it in the deep tech community and the space community, because so many people say to me, space is different to everything else. And I'm like, yeah, it's hard, it is expensive, but the mindset shouldn't be. And you've just articulated that beautifully, is that actually you only have the money to do the science and the engineering if you've got a business model to actually go after. And so I just Thank you from the bottom of my heart. If no one takes anything away from this conversation today, take that away, because that's actually really critical. Is business actually drives science and innovation. And I, you know, having worked for 13 years at Google on the engineering team and spent so much time in the Bay Area, we were chatting earlier, you know, for me, I get that. It's and what's really interesting is that most of the founders over there are actually engineering founders. So they're engineers like yourself who've had to learn to kind of go, I need to have a hardcore business lens at this, because people are not just going to give me money for the sake of it to burn things up. They want me to actually figure out how to do things better.
It's now something I obsess about. Whenever I meet someone else running a business or part of a business, what have you, I'm trying to figure out what is your business model? How do you actually make money out of this, right? Whether it's a cool idea or a boring idea or an ugly idea, a pretty idea, an annoying, it doesn't matter. If you're making money, how are you making money?
Yeah.
Because if I can answer that, I can look at my own business and go, well, I want to do great things, and I need to figure out a way to make money if I'm ever going to do it. Otherwise, I'm just a guy in a garage. And
oh my God,
there's a limit to what you can do in a garage.
I was just like, you're singing from such the same hymn book as me. I feel like we could get up on a little soapbox together and stay this for hours.
We're going to move on. There's a risk in that.
It's so true, though. It's so true. We do. It's, you know, your why matters, and your why is actually about solving something for somebody, and it has to have a large addressable market, because otherwise nobody will pay for it. But I love that you've taken that. And I really love how you've reversed the 5 whys. So the 5 whys is something I often make founders that come in and talk to me for advice. They sometimes get a little teary, because by the 3rd why, they're cranky with me. And by the 4th why, they go, I don't have an answer. And by the 5th why, they're like, I don't think I actually solve anything for anybody. I'm like, might want to go think about it. But what I love about your whys is you've actually reversed it and gone upstream, literally, in terms of the space sector, but in your thinking, more importantly, and actually gone, what are some of the fundamental problems that will need to be solved? It almost seems like, and I want to check this, that actually figuring out that and what that space economy needs to be and some of the needs of it actually then dictates the research and the science and engineering that you're going to go after and solve. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And Elon Musk, right? He's the celebrity entrepreneur of our day. He is solving the big problems for humanity. And there was actually a period where he went through the same thing in the late 90s, right? He couch surfed his way around Silicon Valley and whatever else, and he tried investing. Having come out of PayPal, he had some money and decided investing was not for him. And gosh, taking his money and having him on a board would be that would be trying. But so he was asking, what are the biggest problems in humanity? And you can look at what he's chosen, right? We need to stop the greenhouse effect. How? Well, cars. Let's make them electric. The solar power and the solar grid, right? We need to make that happen. We need to get humans off this rock. He's just picked the biggest problems we have in society and tackled them head on. But he's done it by first recognizing, like, this is the thing that needs solving. And if you can solve it, the value you create is massive, right? You're saving the planet. Who's not going to pay for that, right? But then you've got to figure out all the bits that are going to get paid for that along the way. How are people paying for it? What are they paying for? What's the product? All those kind of questions. They can flow, though, once you've figured out, all right, well, what I want to do is something that is valuable. The business model we can work out.
Yeah. So I love that, because you're doing the same thing. So I remember several years ago talking to Astro Teller at X and talking about, you know, we need trash collectors in space because of all the space junk that's basically up there. And I like it. You've even just gone, forget trash collectors. Let's just refuel it and make the asset actually redeployable a little bit more, which is really cool. It's kind of a divergent and a different way of approaching the same challenge of how do we actually get more out of these assets, which is super, super, super smart. It seems logical when we hear you talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, that seems like the most logical thing in the world to do. Build a fuel station.
Well, thanks. That makes me feel good, because the best ideas always seem logical after you've heard them.
So walk us through how you've got there, because you've mentioned you've got venture capital. How big's your team? How are you kind of going, attracting people onto this journey, you know, attracting people to back you? Like, where are you at? What have been some of the sort of the key learnings that people need to know? Because you've got the great ideas, but great ideas take a lot to execute them, and a lot.
Yeah, in Silicon Valley, there's a saying: if you got $5 and a great idea, you can't even get a cup of coffee.
That's
because
true.
Coffee here costs more than $5.
It's also bad coffee too, but let's not go into that, because the Americans are very upset with me.
Australia has excellent. Anyway, what was I saying? I've completely lost on coffee now.
Value partners, funding.
Oh yeah, how we got here. Okay,
executing on your idea, your team, where you're at now.
Yes. So I came out of Deep Space Industries about a year before that was acquired by Bradford. And I'd been, I had this technology focus, but we were with a group of people who really wanted to do the asteroid mining. So that was the shingle that we wanted to put out. And I'm like, but we need to have technology. So came out of that, I'm like, all right, I want to start another company. I'm probably not unemployable, but I'm getting that. And I met Jeremy, my co-founder. He did a short contract there. And so I was sort of bouncing ideas around, and I convinced him to fly to Silicon Valley and gave him a room to stay in, and we had no money. And we were working out of the garage. And we went through, I think, 3 or 4 different business ideas. So the first thing I had was, well, let's build a commodity exchange, and we'll get Luxembourg or UAE or Australia or Canada to underwrite some bonds so we can get the banks to pay to build a delivery terminal, and for the first like 10,000 tons or something of asteroid mined material, and that way bootstrap the asteroid mining thing. That didn't go anywhere. We looked at manufacturing, and going back to what are those industries going to be in space, we looked at manufacturing and making semiconductor crystals, because it turns out when you solidify or like recrystallize a semiconductor, the buoyancy effects in some of the more exotic semiconductors, like lead wants to sink and aluminum oxide wants to float and all this kind of thing. So we looked at that, and you can make them in zero gravity with incredibly low defect densities, because things like buoyancy and everything else, just they don't exist without gravity. And so, we can make 3 orders of magnitude lower defect densities in crystals. And then we dug into that and realized that to sell into that, we'd have to be well embedded into the telecoms world. And okay, we're in Silicon Valley, but we didn't have that on our team. And it was a huge ecosystem play that we weren't embedded in. So we didn't feel we could sell that. So we put that aside. I also set up Space Arena, which is still on ice, but one day I'd like to organize the first Olympic scale sporting event in space. So we held the first Space Games Summit, and we got people from NASCAR and NVIDIA and like all these places into the room. And I didn't have a business partner that knew how to sell entertainment content. And I don't know how to sell entertainment content. I'm an engineer. So I couldn't really honestly take that business. So we pivoted a number of times. And then Orbit Fab it really came out of that commodities exchange idea of like, well, what do we need to do to like execute on this? Can we make some progress and convince people that they should do it? And we went out and talked to the people that we thought should be doing it. We went and talked to ULA, the big rocket company. We went and talked to people who are doing satellite servicing, like this garbage collection in space that you mentioned. Who's taking out the space trash and how are they going? And what they said was, hey, nobody's doing this right now. And there were structural sort of strategic reasons why they couldn't do it. A large part for the satellite servicing folks is they've got to win their market, right? They've got to convince their customers that it's okay to go up and grab their satellites and remove them from orbit. And they've got to solve the complex rendezvous docking problem with a spacecraft that was never designed to be docked with. They've got a lot of problems of their own. And so they basically said, look, the field is wide open, and yeah, we kind of need it. So we talked to more folks. We talked to some government folks and the like, and they started saying, yeah, we will pay an enormous amount for this, because of course, if you get fuel, you don't have to build a completely new asset. And the most important one was the satellite servicing companies. This is 2018, 2017. There were 8 or 9 satellite servicing companies. So Northrop Grumman, which is now operational in geostationary orbit, doing life extension. There are a couple of companies looking at the garbage collection problem, looking at just inspection. Like no one's ever been able to inspect another satellite, right? They don't interact at all. So people were looking at those 8 or 9 companies, and some of them said, yeah, we would see enormous value because our assets have to go up and visit everybody else. So they've got to drive around a lot more. And so they gave us numbers on how much they'd pay, which were just phenomenal. And we knew the launch companies and said, okay, well, we know on the supply side that we could get propellant up for this much, and we can sell it for this much. That's a nice gap, right? There's a business in that gap, that arbitrage. And that was the day when we really identified that was the day we said, okay, this is a business. Yeah, right? Yeah. And we know this business, we know the customers, we've got the team coming together. And so that was it. We put it all together and started calling around for investors. The 3rd of January, I walked into an investor's office, and 5 months later, they gave us a check. So that was the process of starting it. And then 4.5 months later, we handed over hardware to NASA to fly to the International Space Station. That's a whole interesting story. It turns out if you get a gallon of water loose on the space station, we use water as our propeller, like just pump it, make sure our feed systems work and everything. If you get a gallon of water, what's that, 4 liters, 3 liters of water loose, and it gets on an astronaut's face, they can drown because there's no gravity to drain the water. And if you try to brush it aside, the strongest force is surface tension, and it just wraps straight back around.
Oh my God.
And you can't yell for help because you're underneath an inch of water. And so astronauts could drown. So they slapped this payload with a catastrophic level hazard rating and said, it's going to be 18 months or 2 years, right? That's how long it's going to take you to get through all of these, build enough reliability and safety and interlocks and controls and convince us, well, no, there is a launch coming. We want that launch. So we had to get ahead of them, preempting all their concerns on safety and everything else. And James Baldertude had just joined us as our chief engineer. He's another UNSW grad. And yeah, he's got 4 or 5 payloads on the space station and everything. Just brilliant in how he works with people. And so he's able to see technically what the right solution is and then convince people that this is the right solution and they should write a waiver for us, or they should accept ours as satisfying the requirement and everything else. We got our final requirements signed off 2 weeks before we shipped the hardware. Like, we had no time to get this done, and we did it. Got there, went to station, pumped the water back and forth, actually hooked it up to the space station and pumped the water into the space station water supply. And you can imagine what they thought about that, right? If you overpressurize this, you can blow up the water supply. We've got a $200 billion asset here that you're putting at risk. That was not trivial. But yeah, James is brilliant. He got that through. So we did that. That got our legs under us. We flew to space. We learned a lot. And then we went out, raised a seed round. We flew this image behind me, the first operational fuel tanker to orbit. It's pretty small. It's less than 50 kilos. But it's got high test peroxide. So this is a lot more aggressive than water. It's 90% peroxide, very aggressive oxidizer, decomposes in the presence of almost everything. It's a very difficult materials problem. Had to get that to the pad, had to build a fueling port because there was no fueling ports that existed. We couldn't buy a fueling port to put on that. So that flew in June and now are away. And then Lockheed Martin, Northrop, Grumman have both invested in the in Orbit Fab. These companies, they don't like to talk to each other, let alone invest together. They're big competing aerospace prime contractors, but they both realize how important this was, how important it is to the government and their government customers, and how important it's going to be to the commercial industry. So they're both on the cap table and invested. Munich Re Ventures, the venture arm of the world's largest, one of the world's largest insurance companies and the biggest insurer of satellites and rockets, they invested. And then Marubeni, through Marubeni Ventures, the big Japanese conglomerate, they've invested because they like how the financials look long term. They can see a play to help bring us to Asia and those kind of things. So we've picked up some really good investors now. And yeah, we've got our next launch has been announced, going to geostationary orbit. Now it's away to the races. So there you go. That's a quick history of Orbit Fab in a bit longer than you might have wanted.
No, it's actually brilliant because you don't understand how many lessons you've literally given the entire space sector here and the emerging one, right? So first key point that I just want to be like, you actually went out and validated the idea before you started on the science, right? That there was a market need and that people would be willing to pay, and you knew what price point they would be willing to pay at. I mean,
the beautiful thing is we presented a price and we had customers say, we would pay double that. No, we would pay 4 times that if you could deliver the service. I mean, there's a market.
That to me is absolutely one. Again, you're just literally, never mining asteroids, we're mining you right now, because that's gold, right? For people like that, if you're an emerging space entrepreneur watching this, you need to do that. And that doesn't mean being in the lab. It means going out and talking to your customers of the future before you've even finished what you're doing in the lab or even started in the lab. So go. And
if you ever have a customer talk you up on price, drop what you're doing and build that.
Yeah, exactly. I love that, right? Like that's just literally, it's more than gold, it's platinum, right? It's something, it's lithium actually, probably, but it's really critical. Like that's such a really powerful lesson. And then I think talking through the steps that I'm pretty sure everybody's going to have nightmares about water in space right now, and that's actually going to make it into that Tom Cruise movie of somebody's going to murder somebody with water in space. Like that's going to be the stuff of science fiction nightmares. But there's a really important lesson there actually that you unpacked in a narrative that I think we need to acknowledge. That is actually the solution. There's a scientific and an engineering solution for it, but you also need to go along the pathway, the regulatory pathway, and you need to know how to talk to your regulators. and to those people to de-risk, because risk is not something, there's this saying that we have, I really hate it in Australia, that Australians are risk adverse. I'm like, actually, no, that's a wrong way of thinking about it. Managing, you should be absolutely aware of your risks. You should be all over them. You should be deep diving into them, but you shouldn't be afraid of them, because actually deeply understanding your risks is how you mitigate them and how you actually come up with those solutions.
And it's a key advantage for a small company, right? We're taking a bet on a market and a technology, but mostly on a market, right? And if that market doesn't materialize, Orbit Fab will go away. And in the scheme of things, Orbit Fab is a pimple on the side of a mountain, right? And from economic terms. Of course, if it succeeds, we could make a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
And that's the bet our investors are taking. Yeah. But we can take risks in terms of focusing and pursuing that market that a big company can't afford to take, because their brand is at stake, right? And their existing business model, which they have to optimize. So they're in the mindset, optimize a business model and protect it. Startup company in the model of search for a new product, right? Temporary organization searching for a scalable, repeatable business model.
Yeah.
That's it. And one day we'll find a business model and we'll become an established company and we'll work on optimize. But that's not us today. But at that point, our risk profile will change by necessity.
Yeah.
And so understanding and managing those risks, you do a lot of it by intuition, but you can also just acknowledge that there are things small companies can do because of that risk profile that you can't do in big companies. And that's why the economy needs it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also that risks are there to be managed. Like, it's not a thing to shy away from. Actually, any business plan that has no risks in it and says there are no risks and we don't need to mitigate it, instead, all green or orange, I sit there and go, lies. Give me your red risks, because red risks exist, right? Yeah, that water one is a real risk. It's a viable risk. So mitigating against it with, this is how we do this, and this is what the science tells us, and this is how we do it.
From our business perspective, we've committed one of the cardinal sins of a startup. Our probability of succeeding as a business is predicated on the probability of satellite servicing succeeding. And all of those are basically startups. You should never predicate your existence on the success of another startup, because that's just like risk squared. It's crazy. Thankfully, there were 8 or 9 companies then. There are now 60 companies doing satellite servicing. And there 7, 8, 9 different business models. But there's a lot of companies. And Northrop Grumman is operating, and ClearSpace and Astroscale are doing tests in orbit. In Australia, High Earth Orbit Robotics, Space Machines doing some great work. That's starting to prove that bit of the business model, which was actually outside our control, we've got ahead of that, and it looks like that's massively de-risked. All the other things, of course, will people buy fuel? Will they pay for it with the type of contracts we want? Can we get insurance? Can we manage the capital expenditure up front? All those kind of things, they're our problems. We've got to solve those. And so when we go to our investors, we're basically saying, give us money, we'll de-risk this, we'll prove the market, and then we'll ask for more money from somebody else at effectively a lower interest rate, at a better valuation, and build the business and string it together. But yeah, that's how you got to think about it.
I love this. There's so many people in the chat saying, how inspired they are, and they're learning, and they're just enthusiastic about it. And I know we've got a couple of questions coming through, but I want to give a shout out to everybody watching to drop your questions into the Q&A function, because we will come to those in a second. I want to ask you one question on, because something that, there's a couple of things that you've kind of alluded to in talking about the space sector really sort of radically transforming. It's no longer just the primes and the big companies. There are, emerging companies. There's a growth in certain sectors of those emerging companies. So space has changed not only, globally, but in Australia as well. What are some of the things that I guess excite you about that, and the things that you think we should be getting excited about here in Australia, and talking about and considering?
Yeah, when I think back 25 years ago, the business models that I saw in the space industry can be summed up as, give me $1 billion and I will save the world. All right, and it's a bit like, if you're a South Park fan, it's like Underpants Gnomes, right? Step 3, profit. What was step 2? So thankfully, what we're seeing now is a much better level of maturity in the entrepreneurs and the ideas that are coming out, but also in the investors, right? Investors are much more sophisticated now, and they understand it. And I saw a great chart of sort of how many investors have invested in space companies. The typical number of investments by one of the big VC firms in space companies is 2 or 3. Some of them have done 5 or 6, and those are considered like big investors in space industry. They've gone in heavy. A portfolio for a big VC firm in Silicon Valley is 2 or 3 companies in this sector. So you've got to realize that when they talk about being sophisticated, they're trying to pick their winners and get into the deals that they think are going to succeed. It's not going to be a huge number. Now, yeah, the thing is, the maturity and the knowledge is clearly there, and you can get review, you can get advice, people are going to get excited. So from a sort of perspective of what's happening in Australia, I mean, 20 years ago, I left Australia, went to Canada and around the world because there was nothing happening. Came back in 2009 because the Australian Space Research Program, pretty small program, limited to 4 years, and we got a bit of money and tried to build Antarctic broadband. And the vision there was, if we can make an operational constellation serving this niche in Antarctica, we can prove that that can be done from really small satellites. And we've got the technical expertise in Australia. We built the first Ka-band transponder for a CubeSat, and that was built in Brisbane. Right? And it was a world first. That's now been commercialized in a couple of Californian companies. But the goal was to prove you could do that in a small spacecraft with an Antarctic business, and then expand that, do an equatorial constellation, and then just paint the sky black. And this is a few years before OneWeb and several years before SpaceX and Amazon and everybody else jumped on this. And now they're basically doing that, right? The hundreds of thousands of small satellite, tens of thousands of small spacecraft that they're building to deliver global internet. So we tried that in Australia, but the investors, like the appetite for it, the understanding from the investors, it just wasn't there. And whereas in Silicon Valley, they get telecoms, they get global telecoms and how to build companies and how to fund them at certain stages and to prove that out. And so it was here in London and what have you that those kind of companies got their funding. So the situation now in Australia, I see a Moonshot, Blackbird, there's a bunch of VC firms, there's a bunch of startup companies, there's a space agency that's supporting some things. You're starting to see that ecosystem. The great news for Australia is it's on the back of incredibly deep technical skill. Yeah. That's something that Australia has in spades. And so to pivot, and you mentioned this before, right? There's nothing special about space, you need to get the business model right. There's not a lot that's special about the tech. I mean, there's definitely some things, but there's no magic pixie dust. It's like someone anoints it with the magical wand of spaciness. No, you put it into space, and okay, it's got a bit of radiation, and it's in a vacuum, and most importantly, you can't go and press the reset button yet, but there's no maintenance and repair yet. And so those are different. And so if you lose contact with it, sometimes you just never hear from it, and you're left guessing what happened, right? You can't even pick up the shrapnel when it's in space. It's gone. And so it's unforgiving, but it's not hard. You want hard, go to the bottom of the ocean, right? You're in a conductive fluid. There's animals and biologicals trying to grow into you and eat you. It's hundreds of atmospheres of pressure. In space, it's -1 atmosphere. It's the cleanest environment anywhere, right? It's really benign. There's no people to press buttons and destroy anything. It's actually a really nice environment, as long as you don't screw up because there's no reset button. So you can look at it like that, right? That's the situation. So the Australian skill base is fantastic, that technical skill base. To build on top of that, then the business level, right? And the acknowledgement by the government, okay, New Zealand has a rocket program, I guess we can too, let's get a space agency. But now that we've got that, it's a matter of engaging with the global industry, finding the market opportunities, leveraging the fact that we have, a quarter of the world, an eighth of the world down there that Australia dominates from a ground station perspective, like leverage those advantages and really find the exports and find the opportunities in the market. That's the opportunity right now. And it's really changing dramatically. And because there's all this innovation happening with CubeSats and small satellites, the drop and launch, all the supply chains are getting disrupted. And that's opportunity for new entrants. So yeah, now it's the right time, to be honest.
I mean, there's just literally, I feel like we've got soundbite after soundbite that we need to like mic drop moments from you today. Magic space dust for me is going to be like the takeaway of this. Super. I mean, people are going to think we've planned this before, because so much of what you said is stuff that I bang on about all the time is, we have the capability here, we have the talent, we just need to actually unleash it and unlock it and take it forward. I have got more questions, but we're going to have another chat, because I feel like there's questions coming in from the audience that I want to just ask you. And I feel like we're going to have to do round 2 of this, because I think there's more to unlock visionary wise with your thinking. And I feel like we're barely scratching the surface of some of it right now. And it's all really valuable and needs to be unpacked and translated into actions to get everybody who is watching this to go do them, which is something that I really am committed to doing. But let me go to the questions because we've got a few here and we'll try and be really quick through them. So Scott has asked that he's heard Orbit Fab is launching its next tanker to GEO via lunar flyby. How did that come about and what are the advantages? And if you can't tell us, it's okay to just talk about magic, space dust, and distract me in a different direction.
No, I'll have a go at answering that actually by going back to our first mission to the space station. I think enough time has passed that I can talk about how we actually pulled that off, because we got that contract, and we got that contract not from NASA to fly to the space station, but we got a contract from the International Space Station National Lab, which is the US body that's funded in parallel to NASA, and they get half the astronaut time and half the launch capacity to send science experiments for science and for commercialization on the International Space Station. And what had happened was that they'd recently had a pretty poor review and lost their CEO because they weren't doing enough on the commercialization side. And so we showed up and said, well, we're not doing anything on the science side, and you're a national lab, but we do want to fly something. And they said, yes, how much do you want?
Amazing.
And so there was this opportunity, this crack, where we could offer them something, which is a good story on commercialization, and they could offer us something which is up mass and astronaut time. Now, we got some good engineering data. I'm not going to say we got any science data. We got some great engineering data. And it really put us on the map. We got some fantastic publicity out of that as well. But that was the reason we were able to squeak that through. Then when we built this one, when we built Tanker 001, Tenzing, we've called it, that first tanker, it was initially a 6-month development program. Ended up through some launch delays being 9 months. But we built that tanker for an incredibly low amount of money because of the partners we had. And we said, oh, well, why don't you put other payloads on there? That will offset the cost. We had some friends who wanted to do satellite inspections. The cameras actually belong to Scout, a satellite inspection company. And so we're like, well, we want to test cameras for rendezvous docking, and you want them for taking photos of satellites. Let's put them on. You get a great deal. We got them to orbit in a year after their founding of the company, which, similar to us, almost unheard of. And yet they did it for virtually nothing because we just wanted to get the cameras up. And so we cut all these deals as to how we can manage to squeak through the cracks and take a tiny amount of money and leverage it into the most amount of advance we can get. So that's one thing that comes from 20 years experience. And having 20 years experience is terrible because it takes 20 years. But the advantage is then you learn where all these little opportunities are. So as Australian companies, it's a bit isolated from that. So there are programs to sort of get introductions to the US and try and find those, but make sure that you have an advisory board that is linked in and can give you real advice. Like, we have an advisory board. We don't even put them on the website. I think we even put their names anywhere. It's because we're not after the names. What we're after with is their real advice, their real opinions, and identifying opportunities and how we can get into things. So we did this one extremely cheaply. Now we're going to geostationary orbit, and you can bet that we did that on a great deal. And how do we do that? Well, look at who's involved on the on that. GeoJump, which spun out of Space Fund Labs, and it's Spaceflight, who we flew this Tanker 001 with. So Tanker 002 going to geostationary orbit. Yeah, we managed to find things that they wanted to test and develop, business models, technologies, everything else, multiple different layers of benefit. And then say, right, here's what we can bring in terms of finances, in terms of technology, in terms of expertise, in terms of exposure, all these types of things, customer access, anything that we could imagine to bring to the table, and found places to hook it in so that other people would get value out of it. And that way we put together a great deal. Now, going around the back of the moon, that was the idea of Spaceflight Industries, Grant Bonnan there. I'll call it the Bonnan orbit around the back of the moon. Yeah, it's a good way to do it if you're on a lunar injection, which is the rideshare opportunity they've managed to get. And so it was just a bunch of opportunistic things coming together with a group of friends who knew each other because we've been around together. We were all at Grant Bonnan, Megan Crawford at Space Fund, and myself. We were all at Deep Space Industries. And so again, just being around those people and having built relationships meant that we could see where the opportunities were. And that helped so much.
You've actually kind of answered a whole bunch of questions of my questions we didn't get to about the critical nature of partnerships and collaborations, and actually, coming together and actually seeing that you need to do this together. You can't actually do this in a silo or on your own. It is going to be a critical pathway to success. And I think it's a really important one. And I think it's a really important one for us to take away. As the host of the National Space Industry Hub, our job is to connect and collaborate. It's not to do it all. It's not to be it all. It's actually the least of those things, but it is to try and connect people and bring those opportunities together so that they can succeed in the vision and the mission of what they want to achieve and do. I'm conscious of your time and our time, and I think we're unfortunately not going to be able to get to the other questions that we've got in the Q&A today. But I do just want to give, if there's one call to action, I love being host because I get to ask the last question. If there's one call to action to anybody watching here today that you would want them to take away or to do from this, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the advice that I guess I never needed to be given when I was at university, just go and do it. Figuring out what you got. It's easy for me to sit here looking back 25 years and go, oh, here's why I did it, and here's the logical reasons and the strategy and everything. It's a much messier process than that. Just go out and do it. And then one day you get to look back and go, oh, I guess that's why I did it. Here's a great story. No, get out and do it. It's a messy process. Decide what you want to do. Figure out reasons why. Ask the 5 whys up and down on everything, and start something. Get ready to pivot. Like, ask the whys and take the feedback that it tells you. If you don't have a market, try again. There's nothing wrong with that. And I've started 15 companies. 4 of them are serious startups, and this is the only one that's got VC investment. Right? And I've got the scars and the arrows from all the things I did wrong. And someone probably asked, what did you learn from Deep Space Industries? Is a lot. We don't have enough time. Do we have another 3 hours? But do it. You'll fall flat on your face. That's okay. Expect to do that a half dozen times. And then you'll learn enough and you'll realize how to thread the needle on starting up a business. And you'll have people who also fell flat on their face with you. And they'll help you on the next one. And to the investors, anyone who's looking to back this, to the agencies supporting this, be prepared to support people who are going to fail. Tell them that, okay, you've failed, let's try again, right? As long as you don't waste people's money, as long as, and they're paying you to do an experiment, right? They're not, half the time investors, they know that of their portfolio, only one of them is going to make it big out of 20, 10 or 20 companies, right? The other 9, you test the business model, you test the assumption, you try pivoting into something else. If it doesn't work, that's okay. They'll still back you on the next one, knowing that they've just paid for some really expensive education for you, right? Go and get that education. So that's it. Go out there, just do it. Just get on with it.
I love it. Daniel, this has been such a fun chat on so many levels. Your experience, your willingness to share it, your wisdom, your battle scars and all. Thank you so much. I know that so many people have really going to walk away with a personal challenge or a personal learning from this. I'm going to be so bold as to say I definitely want to come back to you and have another chat and unpack some more, because I think there's so much richness in what you've said, and I really feel like it's a bit of a gift to us today, but I'd love to get another gift of that in the future if we could be so bold to ask that already. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you're doing. We want to keep in touch. We want to see what you're doing. And if there's anything that any of us can do today, reach out, let us know, because we're here to help and really see your dream come to life. I think it's phenomenal. So round of applause from the virtual room for Daniel today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kellyanne. I appreciate that. And I will say, if there are entrepreneurs trying to get off the ground and think that I might be able to help them, feel free to reach out. I'll drop my LinkedIn in the chat as well. But we're building a bustling space economy, and it's going to take a lot of people.
My gosh, generosity doesn't stop. So thank you so much, Daniel. As I said at the beginning of this hour, we are going to say thank you and farewell to Daniel, and hello and welcome to Tim Parsons, who is our expert in residence here at the National Space Industry Hub. So Tim, I'm pretty sure that couldn't have been any better in actually kind of inspiring people to think about giving their idea a go. And I want to talk to you really briefly about what we've launched and what is out there, which is the perfect pathway for people who want to give it a go, the Fast Start program. So tell us a little bit about that and what the opportunity you see is there.
Sure. Look, so I think Daniel put it beautifully. You know, we've got this incredible talent in this country, incredible technical talent, incredible business talent, and we really want a place where that talent can come together and build a local space industry. In fact, you know, when you catch up with Daniel again, you'll discover he has had the most amazing places like the National Space Industry Hub to develop his skills in, working out of places like JPL in California. And so that idea of a hub where folks can come together, can learn from each other, can perhaps maybe not fall on their face so often because they're getting smart, tips from experts. That's really the vision we have. Fast Start is a program where companies that are trying to go through that tough early stage, especially deep tech space companies, can get personalized coaching. They get one-on-one mentoring. They get 6 months here in this deep tech palace, Takata, here in Sydney, in Tech Precinct. There's not just office space, there's prototyping equipment, there's gear, there's people who are engineers, design for manufacturer experts, and a huge network. And it's an addition to the Australian space ecosystem. We think it's a marvelous place to bring partners, to bring investors, to bring talent, and activate their excitement, activate their energy, and have them, in many ways, de-risk that entrepreneur journey as much as one can by surrounding people with, support, smarts, connections to folks like Daniel, and of course, leveraging the advantage we have as Australians, we can get into any party anywhere in the world, and let's use that to get rides into space. Let's build an in-space economy, and let's solve some of the world's biggest problems.
I love it. And so for all of you there wondering a little bit more about Fast Start, you meet Tim. Tim's the coach on Fast Start. It is an equity-free. We don't take an equity stake. There's no obligations to it. It is a program that is supported by the New South Wales government through the National Space Industry Hub to actually help these aspiring space founders to take their idea and turn it into reality. So, over those 6 months, you will be coached, boot camped, asked your 5 whys up and down, and probably multiple times, so many times you may not actually like it. It might make you a little bit uncomfortable. But really the goal is actually to turn your idea into a viable business. And, we've got investors sitting alongside us that are leaning into that mentoring process. We've got industry experts, we've got government experts, we've got a whole wealth of people that want to support you and want to help you. So I really want to encourage you today, if you're thinking about that, or if you know somebody who should be thinking about it, who is maybe a little bit hesitant and hasn't just dived in to give it a go, like Daniel said, have them reach out to Tim, have them reach out to us on the website. The website's in the chat, cicadainnovations.com/fast start space. Come along and apply for it, because we want you to be part of the community and part of the broader space ecosystem across Australia, and connect you with the networks, the knowledge, and the people that you need to support you on your journey. And we couldn't be more excited to see what comes out of that program. So with that, we are at time, and I do want to wrap up, and I want to thank everybody today for participating. Particular thanks to Daniel, his insights and just wisdom and knowledge and journey and generosity in sharing that. I know I got a lot out of it. I'm sitting here, about to record some stuff for our foundation's space program today, and sitting there going, I should just record Daniel, basically. His story just illustrates that perfectly. So thank you to Daniel. Thank you to the team at Investment New South Wales for the support on standing up and the vision for the National Space Industry Hub. Thank you to Tim for joining us too and inspiring us all to kind of apply for Fast Start. If you're an entrepreneur out there or an aspiring entrepreneur, check it out on the website. The QR code is on the screen. You can find out more about the National Space Industry Hub and all about the programs that we're going to be launching and bringing to market. And sign up for our newsletter, get involved, stay in contact. We want to build a thriving community. We want to connect with the communities that already exist in this space across Australia. And most importantly, we want to help you succeed in this space. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.